Emry decided, not for the first time in his life, that nothing truly dangerous ever began with alarms. It began with quiet corridors, polite nods, and doors that opened too easily. He had been sent with a data pad containing a supply discrepancy report, 3 missing crates of atmospheric filters, the kind of problem that inspired paperwork rather than panic. The instructions had been simple: deliver, confirm receipt, leave. It was a process so harmless it bordered on insulting. Somewhere between the third corridor and the fourth identical corridor, the simplicity dissolved. The walls shifted color subtly as he walked, reacting to his movement or perhaps judging it. The lighting adjusted itself in a way that made him feel like he was always just slightly under inspection. A pair of Keithian guards stood at an intersection ahead, tall and impossibly still, their long ears angled back in a posture he had been told meant neutrality but looked to him like mild disapproval. Emry slowed, offered a respectful nod, and attempted to look like someone who absolutely knew where he was going. One of the guards inclined their head in return and stepped aside. That was the first mistake. "Thank you," Emry murmured, because politeness was often the only tool he had. He turned left. Or maybe right. He would later argue it didn't matter, because all the corridors looked like they had been designed by someone who disliked individuality. A set of doors slid open before him without request. That was the second mistake. Beyond them, the air changed. It carried a faint resonance, like the echo of something vast and controlled. Emry hesitated on the threshold, glancing behind him. The guards had not followed. They had not stopped him either, which felt incorrect. "Well," he muttered under his breath, "either I'm very important or very lost." He stepped inside. The hall expanded around him in a way that felt less like architecture and more like intention. Light did not come from any visible source, but hovered in layered panels above, shifting slowly like a restrained aurora. Figures stood arranged in precise formations, their garments reflecting faint constellations as they moved, or rather, as they didn't move. The silence was not empty. It was structured. Emry stopped walking immediately. He had the sudden, overwhelming realization that he had entered something that was not meant to be interrupted, or visited, or breathed in too loudly. "Oh," he whispered with the deep conviction of a man who had just professionally ruined his own life. No one turned. No one reacted. The ceremony, or whatever it was, continued with an elegance that suggested it had been unfolding long before he arrived and would continue long after he was gone, assuming he survived long enough to leave, which he decided was now a secondary concern. Primary concern: do not move. Emry adjusted his stance carefully, aligning himself with the nearest row of dignitaries at the edge of the hall. He held his datapad close to his side, as if it were a ceremonial object rather than a report about missing filters. His posture stiffened into something he hoped resembled belonging. "I am definitely supposed to be here," he murmured to absolutely no one. A soft chime resonated through the chamber, low and precise. Several figures shifted in unison, their long ears tilting in coordinated angles that meant something very specific in Kethian culture, and absolutely nothing to Emry. He copied them anyway. It felt safer. Time stretched. Minutes or hours slid past in measured silence. Emry focused on breathing quietly and not attracting attention. He had reached a fragile state of internal negotiation, where if he simply existed correctly, the universe might ignore him. That was when the hand appeared. It was small, warm, unexpectedly firm. It slipped into his as if it had always intended to be there. Emry froze. His first instinct was to look around wildly, but he suppressed it with heroic effort. Instead, he glanced down slowly, as if sudden movement might trigger consequences he was not equipped to handle. The child stood beside him, half a step closer than she had been before, or perhaps she had not been there at all. Her ceremonial attire was intricate, layered in soft metallic fabrics that shimmered faintly with each subtle shift. Her long ears were adorned with delicate rings that caught the ambient light, producing faint, almost musical reflections. She did not look at him. She simply held his hand, tightly. Emry blinked once, twice. "Well," he whispered, barely moving his lips, "this is new." The girl's grip did not loosen. If anything, it adjusted slightly. her fingers curling more securely around his, as if confirming his presence. He waited. Nothing happened. No guards rushed forward. No alarm sounded. The ceremony did not falter. It continued, vast and indifferent, as if a small, human-sized anomaly at its edge was beneath its notice. Emry considered his options, which were limited and increasingly absurd. Option 1, gently remove his hand and pretend nothing had occurred. Risk, immediate diplomatic incident, possibly involving arrest, or worse, paperwork. Option 2, do nothing. He chose option 2. All right, he murmured softly, his voice barely a breath. We're doing this. The girl's fingers tightened once more, not painfully, but with a quiet certainty that felt less like a request and more like a decision already made. Emry straightened slightly, adjusting his stance to accommodate the new reality in which he was apparently part of something he did not understand. He stared ahead, into the structured silence, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that somewhere, someone important was probably watching, and that he was holding the wrong hand at the worst possible time. He exhaled slowly. Next time, he whispered under his breath, I'm delivering the report by drone. The first minute passed with the kind of tension that made Emry aware of muscles he had never needed before. The second minute introduced the alarming possibility that this might continue indefinitely. By the third, he had begun silently renegotiating every life decision that had led him into this room, this position, and, most critically, this handshake that refused to end. The girl's grip remained steady, not desperate, not hesitant, simply certain. Emry dared another glance downward, slower this time, careful enough that it could pass for a respectful lowering of the gaze rather than curiosity. Up close, the details of her appearance became clearer. Her clothing was ceremonial in a way that seemed more engineered than tailored, threads woven with faintly luminous strands that reacted to the ambient field of the hall. Tiny symbols moved across the fabric like living script, shifting in patterns he could not read. It was beautiful, and also looked extremely uncomfortable. You're handling this better than I am, he whispered faintly. The girl did not respond. Her face remained composed, her eyes fixed forward, her posture perfectly aligned with the others. Only her hand betrayed deviation. Emry adjusted his own posture again, attempting to match the stillness around him. His shoulders straightened, his chin lifted just enough. He tried to project the confidence of someone who belonged in interstellar ceremonies instead of someone who had gotten lost on the way to a storage office. A soft, harmonic tone rolled through the chamber again, deeper this time, resonating through the floor in a way that made his boots feel like they were gently humming. Oh, good, Emry murmured. More mysterious sounds. The girl's fingers shifted slightly at his words, not loosening, but reacting. He felt the smallest tremor pass through her hand, subtle enough that it might have been imagined. Encouraged, he lowered his voice even further. I'm going to assume that means something important, he continued. Possibly stand still and do not embarrass yourself. I'm doing my best. Another faint shift, this one unmistakable. Not a laugh, but close. Emry allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. He kept his eyes forward, resisting the urge to look at her again. All right, he whispered. We have a system. I talk quietly. You don't report me to anyone. Her grip tightened for half a second. Agreement, he decided. Time stretched again, though now it felt slightly less hostile. The vast hall no longer seemed entirely indifferent. There was at least this small, shared anomaly within it. Emry became aware of the rhythm of the ceremony, the precise intervals between tones, the synchronized shifts of posture, the subtle changes in the light above that marked transitions he did not understand but could begin to anticipate. He started copying them more accurately. Look at me, he murmured under his breath, participating. The girl adjusted her stance almost imperceptibly, and Emry mirrored her without thinking. Their movements aligned just enough that, from a distance, they might have appeared intentional. Somewhere across the hall, unseen by him, attention sharpened. Emry, blissfully unaware of that particular danger, was now focused on a different problem. His hand was starting to go numb. He flexed his fingers slightly, careful not to break the contact. The girl responded immediately, tightening her grip just enough to remind him that this arrangement was not optional. "Understood," he whispered. "No circulation required." A pause, then, softer. "You know where I'm from. Holding hands for this long usually means something." No response. He waited a beat. "I'm just saying, expectations might be forming." The faintest shift again. This time he was almost certain it was amusement. The ceremony progressed into a new phase. A line of figures at the center of the hall moved forward in perfect synchronization, their garments emitting a low, shimmering light. The air itself seemed to respond, thickening with an energy that prickled along Emry's skin. He resisted the urge to lean closer to the girl. "Is this the part where something explodes?" he whispered. "Because I would like advance notice." Her hand did not change, but her fingers pressed lightly against his, a subtle, grounding pressure. "No." He exhaled quietly. "Good. I'm not dressed for explosions." Another tone, higher this time, almost melodic. The light above shifted again, forming patterns that resembled constellations rearranging themselves in real time. Emry blinked slowly. "All right," he murmured. "That's actually impressive." The girl's grip softened for a fraction of a second, not releasing, but easing. It was the first time since she had taken his hand that the pressure had changed in that direction. Emry felt it immediately. "See?" he whispered. "Even I can appreciate things." He hesitated, then added, quieter still, "You don't have to hold on that tightly." The response was immediate. Her grip returned to its previous firmness. Emry nodded once, very slightly. "Or you can," he said. "That's also fine. Completely your decision." The ceremony continued, vast and intricate. But for Emry, the center of it had shifted. It was no longer the towering hall, or the silent dignitaries, or the unseen queen observing from afar. It was the small, steady presence at his side, the hand that had chosen his, and refused to let go. He adjusted his stance again, more comfortably now, aligning himself with her position without conscious effort. "All right," he murmured, barely audible. "I'm here." The girl did not look at him, but this time her grip did not need to tighten to be understood. There are moments in a room full of power where nothing moves, yet everything shifts. Queen Hessa noticed the deviation precisely 7 seconds after it became statistically impossible to ignore. At first it had been nothing, an irregularity at the far edge of the ceremonial formation, a human figure where none had been scheduled. That alone was unusual, but not unprecedented. Diplomatic errors happened, misplaced personnel happened. Entire delegations had once attended the wrong summit and negotiated trade agreements for 3 hours before realizing the star system was incorrect. But the hand did not happen. From her position upon the elevated throne, an architectural construct that responded to her neural field and adjusted itself subtly to her breathing, Hessa observed with the kind of stillness that made lesser beings uncomfortable. The chamber's light bent slightly around her, not out of reverence, but design. She had long ago stopped noticing. Her daughter stood exactly where she was supposed to stand. That was the first problem. Her daughter was holding someone's hand. That was the second. Hessa did not move. She did not speak. She did not even shift her gaze in a way that could be detected by the observers aligned along the hall. But her attention narrowed, precise and absolute, isolating the anomaly. The human male. He was not performing. That more than anything drew her interest. He stood with the rigid caution of someone who understood he was out of place, but had not yet decided whether to panic. His posture was an imitation of Keithian formality, imperfect but earnest. His eyes remained forward, though not with trained discipline, more with the determination of someone who suspected that looking around would make things worse, and yet he did not pull away. Hessa's long ears angled a fraction, a movement so slight it would have gone unnoticed by anyone not trained to read it. Inquiry. Her daughter did not reach for people. Not since the war. Not since the day silence had replaced questions. Hessa allowed herself a single controlled breath. Below, the ceremony continued with absolute precision. The harmonic fields pulsed in measured intervals, the dignitaries shifting in perfect synchronization as the next phase began. Light cascaded across the chamber in layered patterns, reflecting off ceremonial armor and woven fabrics designed to translate status into visual frequency. None of it faltered, but a tension, subtle and quiet, began to gather. A pair of senior advisors, positioned 3 rows from the center, adjusted their stance by less than a degree. Their gaze did not break formation, but their awareness shifted. The pattern at the edge of the hall had been noticed. Hessa tracked the movement without appearing to. Interpretations would already be forming. A human presence beside the princess. Physical contact. Duration exceeding acceptable thresholds. Possible meanings. Symbolic gesture. Unannounced diplomatic statement. Controlled breach. Or, her gaze returned, sharper now. Or something else entirely. The human spoke. Hessa did not hear the words. The distance, combined with the dampening field woven into the chamber, ensured that only fragments of sound escaped localized space. But she saw the movement of his lips, saw the slight shift in his posture, saw the response. Her daughter's hand tightened. Not reflex. Response. Hessa's expression did not change, but something beneath it recalibrated. The child had not responded to stimulus in that manner in over 3 cycles. Not to tutors, not to attendants, not to her. And now, the human spoke again. This time there was a visible change, a micro-adjustment in the girl's stance, a subtle shift of her fingers, not withdrawal, not resistance, engagement. Hessa's fingers rested lightly against the arm of her throne. The surface responded, adjusting its temperature to match her skin. She did not notice. Around her the court remained flawless. No one broke formation. No one acknowledged the deviation. But the awareness had spread, thin and controlled, like a ripple that refused to become a wave. A misinterpretation here could become doctrine. A doctrine could become policy. Hessa had built her reign on preventing such accidents. And yet, her gaze lingered. The human flexed his hand slightly. The girl tightened her grip immediately, a correction, not a reaction. He stilled. Hessa almost smiled. Almost. There was no fear in him. Confusion, yes. Caution, certainly, but no fear. That was unusual. Most humans, when placed under direct observation in a Cathian ceremonial environment, exhibited elevated stress indicators within seconds. Accelerated breathing, micro-tremors, a distinct urge to either speak or flee. This one whispered and remained. Hessa's ears shifted again, this time a fraction forward. Interest. The central procession advanced, drawing the focus of the chamber back toward its intended axis. The ceremony reached its most intricate phase, energy fields overlapping in controlled harmonics that required absolute precision from every participant. Still, at the edge, the anomaly persisted. The child did not release him. Hessa considered the variables. Intervention would disrupt the ceremony. Non-intervention would allow the situation to continue. Continuation increased the probability of external interpretation. External interpretation. Her gaze moved briefly across the assembled dignitaries. Each one a potential observer. Each one a potential storyteller. She returned her focus to the pair. The human said something again. This time the girl's fingers eased, not fully, but enough. Hessa's breath stilled for half a second, then resumed. She did not understand the mechanism that more than anything unsettled her. Not the breach of protocol, not the presence of an unregistered human, but the simple, undeniable fact that her daughter, who had withdrawn from touch, from connection, from the world itself, was standing in the most formal chamber of their civilization and holding on. By the time Emry reached what he estimated to be the second hour, based on nothing but the growing resentment in his legs, he had developed a quiet respect for Cathian ceremonies and a deep personal dislike for them. His hand was still occupied, very occupied. "I'm starting to think this is less of a gesture and more of a contract," he murmured under his breath, careful not to move his lips too much. "If there's paperwork later, I'm leaving." The girl did not look at him. She hadn't, not once. Her posture remained precise, her chin slightly lifted, her gaze fixed forward like every other figure in the hall. But her fingers remained wrapped around his, steady and unwavering, like she had found something and decided it was not negotiable. Emry shifted his weight by the smallest fraction, attempting to avoid collapsing in a way that would undoubtedly be considered diplomatically inappropriate. Bad idea. Her grip tightened instantly. Right, he whispered. No sudden movements. We're still in that phase. A soft ripple passed through the chamber, not visible in the usual sense, but felt, like the air itself had briefly remembered it was made of energy. The light panels above shifted formation, aligning into geometric patterns that seemed to respond to the figures at the center of the hall. Emry blinked slowly. Okay, he murmured. If this is a performance, it's a very expensive one. The girl's fingers pressed lightly against his again, a small, deliberate motion. He paused. Not a performance, he corrected quietly. Noted. He exhaled through his nose, the faintest hint of a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. For someone who had absolutely no idea what was happening, he was starting to feel oddly included, which was probably a terrible sign. A new sequence began at the center of the hall. Several Keithian figures stepped forward in perfect synchronization, their garments emitting a soft luminescence that interacted with the ambient field. Symbols formed in the air above them, complex shifting constructs that looked like language but moved like mathematics. Emry tilted his head a fraction. Is that writing, he whispered, or is that arguing? The girl's grip eased just slightly, the pressure changing in a way that felt almost like a response. He nodded once. Yeah, I see it too. Definitely arguing. He had no idea what he was seeing, but he was committed now. Time continued to stretch, but it no longer felt entirely oppressive. There was a rhythm to it, a structure he could begin to anticipate. The tones, the movements, the subtle changes in light. All of it followed patterns that his mind, slowly and stubbornly, began to map. He adjusted his stance again, this time more carefully. Her hand did not tighten. Progress. Look at that, he whispered. I'm learning. No response. He waited a beat. Don't worry, he added softly. I won't get overconfident. A faint shift in her fingers, barely there, but present. Emry glanced down again, slower than before, more confident in the allowance of the movement. Up close, he could see the fine details of her expression. Calm, controlled. But there was something beneath it now. Not tension, not exactly. Focus, and something else. Something quieter. You're doing better than I am, he said, his voice low enough to disappear into the ambient hum. I'm pretty sure I blinked wrong earlier. Her hand tightened briefly. Agreement, he decided again. The ceremony moved into another phase. The energy in the room shifted, becoming denser, more concentrated. The light above dimmed slightly, focusing attention toward the central figures as they raised their arms in unison. A deep, resonant tone followed, vibrating through the floor, through his boots, up into his bones. Emry inhaled slowly. Okay, he murmured. That one felt important. The girl's fingers pressed against his again, not tightening, not pulling, just there, grounding. He exhaled. Thanks, he added quietly, before he could stop himself. The word hung there small and unnecessary and entirely unscripted. Her grip did not change, but it didn't need to. A subtle movement caught his peripheral vision. Not close, not immediate, but somewhere beyond the edge of his awareness, something or someone had shifted. Emry resisted the urge to look. He had a very strong feeling that looking would be a mistake. Tell me that wasn't directed at us, he whispered. No response. He nodded slightly. Right. Don't draw attention. Which he suspected was already too late. The atmosphere in the hall had changed, just enough that he could feel it without understanding it. Not disruption, not alarm, awareness. Thin, controlled, watching. Emry straightened, adjusting his posture once more, this time with a little more care. If he was going to accidentally become part of whatever this was, he might as well look like he belonged. All right, he murmured softly. We're committed now. The girl's hand remained in his, steady and certain. No hesitation, no question. And for reasons he could not fully explain, Emry found that he didn't want to pull away anymore. Even if he could. Even if it would have been the smarter decision. Another tone echoed through the chamber, marking the transition into what he could only assume was the final phase. Or the middle. Or the beginning again. He had no idea. Next time, he whispered almost to himself, I'm bringing a chair. The girl's fingers shifted once more. A faint, unmistakable response. Not quite a laugh, but close enough that Emry felt it. And for the first time since he had walked into the hall, completely by accident, he didn't feel like leaving. By what Emry privately labeled hour 3 or the point where my legs file a formal complaint, the ceremony had evolved into something that felt less like an event and more like a carefully controlled phenomenon. The air itself carried structure now, faint currents of energy brushing against his skin in patterns that almost felt intentional. He was still standing. This, he decided, was his greatest achievement. I would just like to point out, he whispered faintly, that if I collapse, I'm taking you with me. So for both our sakes, we remain upright. The girl did not look at him. Her hand tightened slightly. Excellent, he added. Mutual survival pact. A low series of tones echoed through the chamber, layered this time, forming harmonics that seemed to overlap in ways his brain couldn't quite follow. The figures at the center of the hall began to move in a new configuration, their positions shifting with precise, almost mathematical alignment. Above them, the light responded, not passively, actively. Shapes formed, complex multidimensional constructs that rotated slowly, their edges dissolving and reforming in response to the movements below. It looked less like decoration and more like computation, as if the ceremony itself was processing something vast and ancient. Emry squinted slightly. All right, he murmured. That's definitely not for decoration. The girl's fingers eased again, just a fraction. He exhaled. Good. I'd hate to think this was just for show. He adjusted his stance carefully, shifting his weight in a way that felt almost synchronized with her posture now. It was no longer conscious imitation. It was instinct, which was concerning. I think I'm adapting, he whispered. That's probably how it gets you. No response. He waited a beat. Next thing I know, I'll understand what those ear angles mean. At that, her fingers pressed lightly against his. He blinked. And that was a reaction, he said softly. I'm counting that. A subtle movement rippled through the outer rows of the hall. Not enough to break formation, not enough to disrupt the ceremony, but enough. Emry felt it more than saw it. The awareness that had been faint before was now clearer, focused. Okay, he murmured, barely audible. We are definitely being noticed. The girl did not change her posture, but her grip shifted, not tighter, not looser, anchored. He inhaled slowly. Right, he added. Stay calm. Look like you belong, which he suspected was becoming increasingly unconvincing. At the far end of the chamber, elevated and distant, a figure moved. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone not already paying attention might have missed it entirely. But Emry felt it, a shift in presence, a change in gravity. He resisted the overwhelming urge to look directly. Tell me that's not important, he whispered. No response. He nodded slightly. Definitely important. The energy in the room deepened. The harmonic tones lowered, becoming more resonant, more final. The constructs above condensed, their shifting forms aligning into something more stable, more defined. A conclusion? Or something very close to one? Emry's fingers twitched slightly, a reflex he couldn't quite suppress. The girl reacted instantly. Her grip tightened, not sharply but firmly enough to still him. He exhaled. Understood, he murmured. No dramatic exits. The central figures raised their arms once more, their movements slower now, deliberate in a way that suggested significance beyond his understanding. The light above them converged, focusing into a single, intricate pattern that pulsed with quiet intensity. Emry watched it from the corner of his eye. All right, he whispered. If something explodes now, I'm officially offended. Her fingers pressed against his again. Not warning, not correction, just there. He swallowed a faint laugh. Good, he added. We're aligned. The final tone sounded. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It resonated through everything, the floor, the air, the light itself, settling into a stillness that felt earned. The ceremony ended, or at least the part Emry could survive ended. The figures in the hall did not move immediately. The silence held, suspended for a breath longer than expected, as if the room itself was confirming that everything had completed correctly. Then, slowly, precisely, movement returned. Postures relaxed by degrees. Heads turned, not abruptly, but with controlled intention. Conversations did not begin, but attention shifted, and it shifted toward him. Emry felt it like a change in temperature. He exhaled quietly. "Well," he murmured, "that went better than expected." The girl did not let go. If anything, her grip became more certain. He blinked. "That's new." He glanced down at her again, slower this time, less cautious, more aware. She still did not look at him. Her posture remained composed, but her hand remained in his, unmoved by the end of the ceremony, unmoved by the shift in the room. Emry straightened slightly, a small, almost automatic adjustment. "All right," he said softly, "we may have a situation." Around them, the hall began to open, pathways forming as figures repositioned, creating lines of movement that had not existed before. And directly ahead of him, space cleared, not by accident, by design. Emry followed the movement without turning his head, his awareness narrowing, the presence from before. Closer now, approaching. He exhaled slowly. "Okay," he whispered, "now we panic." Quietly. The girl's fingers tightened once more, firm, unyielding, as if to say, "No." He stilled. "Right," he added, softer now. "No panicking." The path ahead was no longer empty, and for the first time since this had begun, Emry understood, very clearly, that the person walking toward them was not someone he could accidentally ignore. The distance between them closed slowly, not because the figure approaching was hesitant, but because everything else seemed to move out of her way first. Emry had never seen authority behave like that before. On most worlds he'd visited, power announced itself, loudly, inefficiently, usually with unnecessary armor or a speech that could have been an email. This was different. The movement through the hall was quiet, precise, inevitable. Lines of dignitaries shifted just enough to create a path, their long ears angling in coordinated acknowledgement. No one spoke. No one needed to. Emry kept his gaze forward because instinct told him that staring directly would escalate something he was not equipped to handle. He focused instead on breathing evenly, on standing still, on not doing anything that could be interpreted as historically significant. "Okay," he whispered under his breath. "Whoever that is, we're going to be very respectful." The girl's fingers tightened slightly. Agreement or warning, possibly both. The presence drew closer. Emry became aware of subtle changes in the environment itself. The light dimming just enough to frame the approaching figure, the faint hum of the chamber adjusting frequency as if accommodating a higher priority signal. "Right," he murmured. "Definitely important." He resisted the urge to swallow. The figure stopped a few steps away. Silence settled again, but this time it was not ceremonial. It was focused. Emry allowed himself to look, carefully. Queen Hessa did not resemble the overwhelming force he had expected. There was no towering armor, no exaggerated display of power. Instead, there was precision. Her posture was effortless, her expression composed in a way that suggested she had already considered every possible outcome of this moment and found most of them unsatisfactory. Her long ears were unadorned, angled slightly forward, not aggressive, but attentive. Her gaze moved first to her daughter, then to their joined hands, then to him. Emry felt that look in a way he could not explain, not as pressure, not as threat, as assessment. He nodded once because it seemed like the least incorrect option. "Hello," he said quietly, immediately regretting how insufficient that sounded. The queen did not respond immediately. Her eyes remained on their hands for a fraction longer, as if confirming something that should not have been there. "She has not done this," Hessa said at last, her voice calm and measured, "in a very long time." Emry glanced down briefly, then back up. I get that impression, he replied. The girl's grip did not change. Hessa's gaze returned to him, sharper now, though still controlled. You are not assigned to this ceremony. It was not a question. Emry considered lying. He dismissed it immediately. No, he said. I was trying to deliver a report. I got redirected. A pause. The Queen's expression did not shift, but something in the air did, like a calculation updating. You entered a restricted sequence of corridors, she said. Yes. You passed 2 guards. Yes. They did not stop you. No. Another pause. Emry added carefully, I think they thought I knew where I was going. Hessa's gaze held on him for a moment longer. Then very faintly, almost imperceptibly, something changed. Not quite amusement, but close enough that Emry noticed. That was their error, she said. I'm starting to think it was a team effort, Emry replied. The girl's fingers shifted slightly against his. Hessa's attention flickered to that movement immediately. Her eyes narrowed, just a fraction. She chose you, the Queen said, more to herself than to him. Emry blinked. I was standing here, he said. I don't think I contributed much to the selection process. The girl's grip tightened again. Hessa observed the interaction in silence. You spoke, she said. Emry hesitated. Yes. You were not instructed to. No. And yet you did. Yes. Another pause. The Queen's gaze sharpened again, but there was no hostility in it, only focus. What did you say? Emry considered his answer. He briefly entertained the idea of summarizing his comments in a way that sounded more dignified. He rejected it. I asked if we were winning, he said. The silence that followed was different. Not heavy, not tense. Just unexpected. Hessa looked at him, then at her daughter, then back at him. And that, she said slowly, was your first response to this environment. Yes. A beat passed. And she did not release you. No. Hessa exhaled very slightly. It was not a sigh. It was not relief. But it was the first movement that felt human, or something close to it. Her gaze returned to their hands once more. The girl still had not let go. Even now, even with the ceremony ended, even with the Queen standing directly in front of them. Emry shifted his weight slightly, careful not to disturb the connection. I can let go, he offered quietly, if that's required. The response was immediate. The girl's grip tightened sharply, firm, unyielding. Hessa saw it. She did not look surprised, but something in her expression changed again, deeper this time, more complex. No, she said. Emry blinked. No? No, the Queen repeated, her voice steady. You will not. He processed that, slowly. All right, he said. That simplifies things. A faint ripple of something, again not quite amusement, passed through Hessa's expression. She does not reach for people, the Queen said, her voice quieter now. Not since the war. Emry glanced down briefly. The girl stood exactly as before, composed, silent, holding on. He looked back at the Queen. I didn't know that, he said. I am aware, Hessa replied. Another pause. The air between them felt different now. Not formal, not entirely diplomatic. Something else. Hessa studied him for a moment longer. Then very slightly she inclined her head. Not as a ruler, as a person acknowledging something she did not yet understand. You will remain, she said. Emry blinked again. I was planning to, he said. I don't think I have much choice. The girl's fingers shifted once more. Not tightening, not pulling. Just there. And for reasons he could not fully explain, that felt like enough. The hall did not return to normal immediately, which Emry suspected was because this was normal and he had simply walked into the wrong version of it. People moved again, but carefully now, with a different kind of awareness threaded through their precision. Conversations began. Not aloud, not in ways he could hear, but in subtle exchanges of posture and shifting attention. The ceremony had ended, but something else had begun, and he was, inconveniently, still in the middle of it. Well, Emry murmured softly, this is where I would usually excuse myself. and pretend I was never here. The girl's hand remained in his, firm, certain. He nodded once, mostly to himself. Right. Staying. Queen Hessa had not stepped away. She stood with the same composed stillness, but it was no longer the stillness of distance. It was presence, focused, deliberate, close enough that Emry could no longer pretend he was part of the background. Her gaze moved between them again, not searching, confirming. Around them, attendants had begun to reposition, forming quiet boundaries that guided the dispersing assembly without interrupting it. No one approached directly, but no one ignored them either. It was the kind of attention that carried weight without pressure. Emry shifted slightly, testing the idea of movement. The girl adjusted with him, not resisting, not following, matching. He blinked. That's new, he whispered. Her fingers eased, not releasing, but loosening just enough that he could feel the change. For the first time since this had begun, the grip was not holding him in place. It was staying with him. He exhaled slowly. Okay, he said under his breath. That's, different. Hessa noticed. Of course she did. She is choosing, the Queen said quietly. Emry glanced up. I thought she already did. Hessa's expression shifted, faint but unmistakable. This is not the same choice. He looked down again. The girl still faced forward, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, but her hand no longer held his like a lifeline. It rested there, present. He flexed his fingers, just slightly. She did not tighten her grip. She did not pull away. She simply remained. Emry smiled, just a little. Well, he murmured, progress. The girl's fingers shifted again, this time not to hold, but to adjust, as if she were making space rather than securing it. Emry took a careful step forward. She stepped with him, perfectly aligned, not dragged, not anchored. Together. He stopped. So that's how this works now, he said softly. Hessa watched them in silence, her gaze steady, measuring something beyond the obvious. She has not done that, the Queen said, more quietly than before, since before she learned what it means to lose. Emry didn't respond immediately. He looked at the girl. Really looked this time. Not at the ceremonial layers, not at the composed expression, not at the perfect posture, but at the small, deliberate way she had chosen to stay. I don't think she forgot, he said after a moment. Hessa's eyes shifted to him. No, he added gently. I think she just decided it was worth trying again. The silence that followed was different. Not formal, not controlled. Something looser, something real. Hessa inhaled slowly, her posture unchanged, but something within it easing in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony. You speak without permission often, she said. Emry nodded. It's a problem, he admitted. I've been told. Another pause. And yet, Hessa said, you remain. He glanced down at their joined hands. I think that part wasn't up to me. The girl's fingers moved again. A small, deliberate motion. Agreement. Hessa saw it. Of course she did. The Queen stepped forward then, not as a ruler approaching a subject, but as something quieter, more careful. She stopped just within reach, her gaze lowering to her daughter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly she extended her hand, not to Emry, to the child. The girl did not hesitate. Her free hand lifted, small and certain, and rested in her mother's. Hessa's breath caught, just slightly, just enough that Emry noticed. 3 hands, linked. Not by ceremony, not by protocol, by something far less controlled. Emry looked at them, then back at the Queen. I feel like I accidentally started something, he said. Hessa's gaze flickered to him. You did not start this, she replied. You allowed it. He considered that, then nodded. I can live with that. The girl shifted again, this time stepping closer to her mother, but not releasing Emry. The connection remained. Different now. Balanced. Emry straightened, the tension that had followed him since he entered the hall finally beginning to dissolve. He was still out of place, still unplanned, still entirely unqualified for whatever this was. But he was no longer standing still, hoping not to be noticed. He was part of something that had chosen him without asking, and for once, he didn't feel the need to leave. Hessa studied him one last time, her expression no longer confined to the boundaries of diplomacy. "There will be questions," she said. Emry nodded. "I figured. There will be interpretations. Also figured," a pause, then faintly, "some of them will be incorrect." He smiled slightly. "I'm very familiar with that." The girl's fingers shifted again, a soft, grounding presence that no longer held him in place, but stayed because it wanted to. Emry glanced down at her, then back at the Queen. "So," he said, "what happens now?" Hessa looked at their joined hands, then at her daughter, then at him, and for the first time since he had seen her, she allowed the smallest hint of something that did not belong to a queen. "We continue," she said. Emry exhaled. "Good," he replied, "because I still have that report to deliver." The girl's fingers tightened briefly, not to stop him, just to remind him. He smiled. "Later," he corrected, and this time no one disagreed.